thank you for giving me the chance of sharing something about my project and having a conversation with Marlies in a while, and also actually the whole day. I really like this idea of having this thematic focus on impact, but I'm sure very different way of interpreting this. So I think we'll all be inspired, especially by how others see it. So that's also maybe part, or maybe this part of this exchanges. So let's see. Yes, it works. My project, indeed, experimented with city streets to transform urban mobility. And before I get into the details of the project, I want to start with the kind of thinking that's behind this project. And at the center of the project are indeed streets. And streets are the places where the relationship, the intimate relationship between cities and mobilities become visible and can be experienced. And that's a relationship where there are synergies. Mobility is a key factor in providing access to people, activities, resources. But mobility is also a key factor in all sorts of nuisances, pollution, accidents, etc., etc. So it's a place of tension and also a place of synergy. And what to me makes streets fascinating is that they provide a way, and again, a way which is very visible, can be lived of orders, higher orders, that are somewhat abstract and less difficult to actually see, to actually live. And this is again all about the relationship between how cities, what cities are, how they function, how they transform, and how mobility is intricated in this process. I think the shift from relatively self-contained compact cities where walking was the main way of moving around and people would on average travel 4 kilometers a day, to the cities of today, which are much more networked, open, borderless, even you could say, where motorized transport has become a dominant way of moving around, and when people travel in the order of 40 kilometers a day. So an explosion of mobility and, of course, many other fundamental changes. Now, that explosion of mobility has created, of course, all sorts of opportunities, benefits, but also challenges of which we are become more and more aware. And don't be afraid, I will not go in the detail of all these challenges, but I want to say two things here. One, that there is a great diversity of them. And here is a list. I'm sure you could have other ideas. Maybe you don't think some of these are really important, but you think there are others that are not in the list, should be there. So that's what they are diverse. Second, there are different sorts of challenges. Let me just name three. Some of them are challenges that you can think that could be solved by transport technology. Think of electric cars. They might be able to solve challenges like that. A second group are challenges that, it's plausible that technology can solve. There is an argument, but there is, without going into detail, there is also quite some debate. Is it truly possible? Will it happen on time? But it's thinkable. But to me and others, a third category is crucial, which is one in which transport technology, electric cars, self-driving cars, whatever, cannot be a solution. Actually, if those solutions would mean that we don't question our way of moving around, they can even make some of these things worse. So what we need here, and that awareness is growing, is a fundamental change in the way we move around, and maybe even considering moving around less in some fundamental way. So that's the way. So we need to change. However, that change is all but trivial, because in the mobility system, there are incredible lock-ins, as shown by this great recent article on the political economy of car dependence, which shows very well how car dependence is, it's an intricate network of factors ranging from infrastructure, land uses, business model, lifestyles, culture, and all that reinforces each other and create incredible difficulties in changing this, which is similar to other fields, but this is one of the fields where these lock-ins are more powerful. And actually, if you think of ourselves, our own lifestyles and business models and way of working are also part of this story. So the key question, which is a question, of course, in which also others in other fields are struggling with, okay, how can we change in the face of this complexity, uncertainty, because we know we have to change, but in which direction, and resistance to change. Now, and here there are different possible sources of inspiration. One is the field of transition studies, in which also some of our colleagues work with concepts like the multi-level perspective, practices like transition management, and also here is a whole field. We can have discussions, there are debates. That's not the place today, but what I want to put here at the center today is the fact that in all these approaches and similar one, a key way of trying and answer that question, how to change in the face of complexity and uncertainty resistance, is that of experimenting. And experimenting in the way that, for instance, is captured by this notion of transition experiment. So short-term actions through which alternative structures, cultures, and practices are explored. So that combination is crucial. So short-term action, something you can do in the short term, but at the same time you're exploring something fundamental. That tension is what it's all about. And here we are getting to our project where we apply this idea of transition experiments to what we call street experiments. So again, in our case, let me read this one, intentional temporary changes of the street use regulation and or form aimed at exploring systemic change in urban mobility. And those red words are important, because you could, again, it's the tension between the two. It's the temporary, but also the exploration of something which is a bigger change. It's not just that local temporary change. It's also not making that intervention permanent, which already would be a change, but it's really using this kind of experiment to question how the whole system is, to explore the possibility to change it, but also discover the limitations, the difficulties of change in ways which maybe you have not been able to anticipate. Again, remember the complexity of the whole. So now I can get into our project that tries and do this at least in some ways. And maybe the best way to describe the problem, but I should remember the partners, which again I will not cite in detail, but I do think it's important to stress it's different universities, 5, 6 cities, non-academic partners, so there is this consortium, European consortium of different actors involved. And so let's get to the project. To describe it as a whole, I would say, in this case, what we do is at the same time develop analytical tools to understand some issues in this part of this broader question, and at the same while generating insights on those issues in a way that could facilitate process of transformation, of change, transition that go beyond our work as researchers. That's the kind of general idea, and I will now name some components of this idea and show one example where some of this might be happening, and then look forward to my conversation with Marlies. So, 4 main components. The first combination of tools and issues is about the question how to identify design and regulation that increase the diversity and inclusivity of street uses. And again, see here is not simply saying, okay, how can we make mobility sustainable, like in a shift from cars to bicycle? It really asking the question, of how can a diversity of uses, including non-mobility uses, the complexity of public space, the street as public space, with all its claims, and inclusivity, which means, of course, deliberation, debate, choices, and use experiment. In this case, the tool is a way to gather and then use as a way to have a discussion the perception of users, citizens, involved in these things, with a combination of online and face-to-face tools to elicit those perceptions, and then move from that to a sort of participatory evaluation tool. We have to use also this language you could discuss in the European thing, but anyway, to have this discussion. The second issue, tool combination, is about ways to enable accessibility by cycling and walking, and I should add wheelchair, which again, is not the only alternative or different way of moving around, but at least it's one that challenges some of the assumptions of policies that only look at other ways of moving around. And here the tool is one, it's a GS-based analytical tool that shows both the quality of the connections, but also of the destinations, and of course raises question about what are these everyday needs that people need, different people by the different ways, and of course have different abilities in reaching them. How can we make city district neighborhoods better in this way? These are ideas popularized by notion like the 50-minute city that is being pursued in a city like Paris. A third combination of issues and tools is that of, let's call them mobility innovation, things like shared mobility, micro-mobility, new delivery services. And again, here, they could have many different goals and impacts. Our interest in these projects is to understand how they could be reinforcing of those development I named before, that more diverse, inclusive use of the street, a more localized society and economy, etc. But of how they could also create risks of instead working against this. And the tool is that, in this case, of agent-based modeling, where, by the way, as an innovation, also things as emotions and attitude are tried to be put in. And I'm not, maybe like you should expect me to be able to do all of these things. This is really a very collective, collaborative work with expertise from all sorts of disciplines and places. Now, last but not least, is more of a governance question. And the governance question is, how can we use the potential of experiments to trigger these transformations, at least trigger our understanding, improve our understanding of possibilities and limitation of these processes. And here what is central is the relationship between, on one hand, how should these experiments be to increase that potential, but on the other hand, how should the context, the political, institutional, organizational context be to be receptive, make use of these possibilities, for instance, for city-wide, longer-term policies. And let me finish with one example in which seems this idea of linking these issues, tools, and processes seems leading to actual impact in a very direct way. With also a disclaimer, I will do at the end before I move to the conversation. This is the city of Bologna, one of our six cities we work with, and where also because of our project, and again I stress also, it's definitely not only our project, we're also other factors, but anyway, an experiment was made for what there was the very first one in the city, a temporary school square. By the way, in this case also designed together with the kids of the school. In this case it was so successful, I mean people involved were so convinced that it was worth keeping that, was made permanent after the experiment, and also has become a model which the city is now already replicating in other schools and squares in the city. The disclaimer is that I would never claim it is our project. It was one among any other factors, and also the kind of proof of this. This is not absolutely happening in this simple linear way in the other cities. And it's not because we are different, because the cities are different, the factors are different, and maybe this is also a good point where we can start our conversation. Thank you.
So I suspect the AISSR specifically chose me to respond to Luca's talk because I know absolutely nothing about the subject. But what is absolutely wonderful about it, and I think it really gives you an advantage over some of the other people here, over me certainly, is that your subject matter is so incredibly tangible. There's nothing abstract about it. It's about tarmac and pavement and bicycles and cars and human bodies. And it's, you know, as soon as we step out the building. But I think there's also kind of a trap there that we all have an opinion about it and we all think we know and understand what is going on. Now, that seems to me a real challenge for you and your colleagues. That on the one hand, you want these projects, I think, to be very participatory with policymakers, with urban inhabitants. But on the other hand, you do have theoretical and empirical knowledge that those other people don't have. So I wonder how you deal with that tension.
Yeah, it's a good question, but maybe I should. Let me also say what I think is our role here. It's not saying how things should be, or it's more opening up possibilities. And I think sometime I had discussion about the role of critical scientists, and I definitely think one role is being critical about what there is, but a very fundamental critique by showing that it can also be different. And having it as it is a choice. There are also other possibilities. I think also the strength of this sort of experiment is showing a very material way, but that's crucial because that's something people can experience, anybody, that it can be different. Of course, that can be different could also raise all sort of issues, doesn't have to be pleasant, but it definitely changes when it works, the discourse, the debate. And then the debate is a political debate, and I think, you know, we may be one of the parties, but there are other parties. Certainly in cities where we are not in the city, we are not citizens, it's not us that should decide. But if we are able to open up possibilities, and of course not in a very, very vague way, but also showing how you could follow up on that, what could be benefits, etc., that's impact, I would say, if it works.
But it sounds almost as if what you bring to the party is imagination, which to me would be almost more like an attribute of artists than of academics.
Is it? That's a very interesting question. I don't know what we do, but I would be very happy somebody saying, well, you opened up our imagination. And again, why not that being the role of academia? Of course, it doesn't mean, of course, not in a very literary artistic way, but you could say that much also of the academic work that inspires us, social science, work, books, articles, that we really like, move us, in some way they are opened up our imagination about things that are wrong, that we didn't realize, things that could be different that we didn't realize, of course, in a way which is different from artists, but has that potential. And again, maybe you took me too big on this way, but I really think that. So that's again impact.
So let me think a little further along that line, and specifically about your work package 4, which is the one that's happening in Amsterdam. And here I will step into the role of that amateur urban geographer who knows what's going on. And what seems to me to be the case is that Amsterdam is, like probably many cities, really bad at these big infrastructure projects, which always take 10 years too long and they cost 4 times too much. But what it seems to do well is these small scale things where, in a kind of unobtrusive, non-confrontational way, the car is marginalized. And I'm thinking about right outside our door here in the Sarfatistraat, where the tarmac was painted pink and it now says, you know, cars are a guest here. I'm thinking about my own street that used to be quite wide for cars and they drove very fast. And now they've made it much narrower and the pavement is much bigger and it's more of a walking boulevard. And all that seems to happen in a way that's much more non-confrontational than saying, car, you can't come in. Is my impression correct, and how does that relate to how things work in some of the other cities in the project?
That's a super good question, but I don't know whether my answer can be brief, but let's say 2 things. On one side, that's true not only for Amsterdam, but for all cities. I think this is an interesting way to exploring change because of the way you said. At the same time, at some point, you need to address also the issue of the big infrastructure. They are not unrelated, and which maybe you should do different, not do. So at some point you will hit these walls, certainly when you do it not just in a couple of places, but you start making it like the new norm. And suppose that all the streets were like this, you know, you can see the implication. That's one side. The other side, I think it's interesting when you ask Amsterdam to other cities, because it would seem paradoxical, but of our 6 cities, I mean, you would say Bologna is on one extreme, Amsterdam is on the other extreme. Amsterdam is the least open to experiment as we define it. And for us, it was long a puzzle why, you would say, such a progressive city already, you know, doing so many things that others are envious, you know, cycling, etc. One hand, that's maybe part of the answer. The urgency maybe is less, but it's not that there is no urgency. Those challenges that I show, they also exist here. And in here, you know, you can adopt perspectives, that of the pedestrian, for instance, that of somebody in a wheelchair. I mean, that's certainly not an ideal city to be. So or the city as a space for play or social. I mean, there are definitely steps to be made here too. But what makes it difficult is that to really embrace, here are the other factors I was talking about, you need, in this case, policymakers or a municipality, actors with power that acknowledge that they don't know how to do something. They feel the urgency and they don't know. In Amsterdam, you don't have, not only they feel urgent, but they think they know. And if you think you know, you might use the rhetoric of experimentation, but actually, and really have that discussion, you're really getting to the point, they see experiments defined as this more as a risk than an opportunity, a risk of creating conflict, of losing control. Whereas in other cities, because they feel the urgency, they don't think they know it, they see experiments much more as an opportunity than a risk. But this, I mean, this is a choice that is legitimate. Again, that's a political choice, but that's what we are observing.
A fascinating finding. Yeah. I hope that is also going to be locally kind of disseminated here in Amsterdam.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just looking at Justus. We need to round it off here.
A very brief question.
Okay. Have the COVID lockdowns taught, well, I'm sure it's taught you lots, but has it thrown up any kind of interesting positive insights that you really want to say, this, I think, will want to continue?
Yeah, well, the COVID has been and still is super interesting for this, many developments, but also this. Maybe one thing I could say also, because the time that, COVID forced city to experiment, to use public space in a different way because of social distancing, also because people become more reliable on their public space, direct us out at home, etc., etc. And that's very interesting. Many cities saw this as an opportunity to explore change which is more systemic, longer term, a shift of paradigms. And some are cities in our consortium, Milan is an example, have been really leading in this, really saying use COVID as an opportunity to explore the different use of public space. Again, it's interesting to compare with Amsterdam, which also had, the shares did the same things because they all had to do them because of COVID and it's. But I really had the discussion. They really refuse to call them experiments because otherwise you would come in that sort of discussion that they don't want to go in. Again, I respect that, but it's super interesting that you see very different. They all have to do the same thing, but in one place they call it experiment, the other not. I once wrote an article with Federico Savini, which I think is here, where we said calling something experiment in a city is a very political choice. Because all the time something different is happening, people are trying things differently. But the moment you call it an experiment, you say, well, this is something we could learn something from. It's a very political choice. So not making it and not making it are both very interesting choices.